My review of 2025. 2025 sucked. My prediction for 2026, this year will also mostly suck. Yes, people get married and will get married. Babies were born and will be born. People fell in love, people will fall in love. Two people having an affair are caught on a kiss cam at a Coldplay concert, leading to thousands of memes. There will be joy, yada, yada, yada. But emotionally, politically, communally, Jewishly, we are living through some hard times. And any light at the end of the tunnel seems a long, long ways away. From the Southern California wildfires that destroyed some 16,000 structures in January, also killing 31 people, to the Texas flooding on July 4th, that killed 135 people, including 27 counselors and campers from a girls' summer camp. The plane versus Army helicopter crash in Washington, D.C., that killed all 67 people involved. Those disasters were accidents, not intended infliction of suffering by people to other people. And there was plenty of that, too. I want to make an immediate clarification. There are many years in reviews out there. I don't know what the plural is. Is it years in review? Is it year in reviews? Whatever it is. There are many of those lists and articles and programs that focus on political developments in 2025. It was a hugely momentous year in so many ways. Even though I'm now evidently legally able to talk in a congregational sermon about whatever politics I want for as long as I want, including endorsing or opposing specific political candidates, I'm not going to do that tonight. Political news consumes my social media feed, possibly yours too. And there are new challenges and conflicts every day, many times a day. As just one example, 2025 saw over 270,000 government employee positions terminated, according to the White House, with varying degrees of legality in the termination. There were some real costs to global health and food insecurity, though I will point out that paying American farmers to grow food and then ship it overseas is actually a lot less effective than supporting local farmers to grow their own food. You see, it's a kind of welfare system in our own country, protecting a local industry. In fact, some of the conditions of sending that food aid overseas require them to not grow their own food, and they have to buy ours. So there are efficiencies to be found. However, it was problematic how it was done. There were also thousands of jobs lost in the nonprofit sector from canceled federal grants. But you can go elsewhere for more details on that, the latest on the Epstein files. Instead of focusing on politics, I want to talk about social and emotional trends, feelings, what 2025 meant to the Jewish world, our corner of the human experience. As I mentioned during our high holidays, in the fall of 2024, we wished each other a better new year, and fat lot of good that did. However, it did confirm our humanistic conclusion that sending words out into the universe doesn't actually change the universe. It can improve our emotional state, inspire us, but in the end, action is what improves reality, or the other direction. I think of 2025 as a year of epidemics, widespread, complex challenges that remain with us into 2026. Last year saw an epidemic of high-profile murders. Those two Minnesota state legislators and their spouses shot, 3 murdered in their homes. Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk assassinated on stage at Utah Valley University. Even the family tragedy of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle murdered by their own son. And so many threats of this to so many people. Now, nationally, you may not believe this, but homicides actually dropped nationally by about 20% in the last year, including a 30% drop in Chicago. And that's after a 15% drop in 2024. There was a peak during the pandemic, and it's gone down ever since. Now, does that prove that massive National Guard and Immigration and Customs Enforcement deployments in LA and DC worked? Well, the decline also happened in cities that didn't have those deployments. Could be a broader social trend. And they didn't see armed troops on city streets. In some cities, we're down to murder rates and other crime rates that we haven't seen since the 1960s. Even mass shooting incidents were down by 20% from the year before. But it didn't feel like it. Schools, churches, 2 people leaving a Jewish museum, so many more. From a truck ramming attack inspired by ISIS on New Year's Day, 2025 in New Orleans, remember that? Killed 14 people. At Brown University this last December, there were 12 people shot while they were studying for their final exams. It's the difference between statistics and anecdotes. They're both true, they stay with us, but in different ways. It puts everyone on edge. We wonder, where's the next tragedy going to strike? And sometimes we're afraid to open the news in the morning, lest we find another tragedy. A second epidemic is the epidemic of hostile tribalism. The response to those high-profile shootings, particularly of the legislators and of Charlie Kirk, were both sadly predictable. Grief for your side, not a lot of empathy for the other side, and maybe even a kind of schadenfreude, a joy in the suffering of your enemies. It's not just hostile political tribalism, but it's also the unapologetic growth of Christian, or call it white nationalism. There's a deep hostility in government today to DEI. It rejects any kind of corrective measures. It makes deep and penetrating accusations of reverse discrimination. And there is some evidence that suggests that if you're a young white man trying to get a job, it is harder in a world where they're trying to correct the workforce to a better balance with demographic trends. Because if you're white and 50 and you've been in a job for 30 years, it's different than if you're just starting out. So there may be some empirical data basis to some of this resentment, but the response has gone in the other extreme. You see the erasure of just about anything that's non-white male in some places. They're presumed to be unmerited. When that plane crash happened in Washington, D.C., they blamed DEI initiatives in air traffic controller hiring because the assumption was someone unqualified must have been there if you're not hiring someone who looks like other people that you know. Most publicly, we've seen expressions of white nationalism in the racial profiling in immigration enforcement. Yes, this is a political issue, but it's also expressing the value of compassion and the value of equal treatment before the law. According to the Department of Homeland Security, after January 20th, in 2025, 600,000 individuals were deported, and another 1.9 million self-deported. The southern border encounters are down from 95,000 a month in December of 2024 to 12,000 a month in September of 2025. It's been cut by many factors. By comparison, in Barack Obama's attempts to increase deportations to create an immigration compromise, he peaked in deporting 400,000 people in 2012. This is another 50%, 600,000 in the last year. Over his 8 years as president, Obama deported 3.1 million people. Now, in Trump's first 4 years, he deported 900,000. But if he caused to leave 2.5 million this year, then that rate is increasing. But now we know what it takes to get deportation rates that high on the streets of a city, in schoolyards, at Home Depot parking lots, even at immigration courts where a case is dismissed and the agents are waiting. This fear and loathing of the other also means targeting some of the most vulnerable as if they were the most dangerous. For every transgender woman playing college volleyball or transgender inmate claiming to be transgender so they can be sent to a women's prison, and those cases do exist in very small numbers. For all those cases, consider the parents of trans children trying to keep their kids from committing suicide, and gender-affirming care, even without surgery, demonstrably helps prevent trans suicide. Or the trans adults, able to make their own choices, and yet they are beset with small and large indignities, from bathrooms to passports and government ID. If even Marjorie Taylor Greene is complaining about toxic conflict, the situation is really bad. A third epidemic is the epidemic of loneliness. It's paradoxical. How can you be tribal and lonely? Well, maybe it happens the other way around. Maybe being lonely makes you long for a tribe and fiercely defend the one that you find. It also generates the terrible online behavior of the flame wars. It has us seeking endorphin hits from small screens and online games. We have shorter and shorter attentions and shorter memory spans. When you have a lack of hope and a lack of community, you can see it reflected in falling marriage rates, in falling birth rates, in fewer and fewer people imagining they'll ever buy a home. Of course, what happens when you buy a home? You join a neighborhood. You put down roots. And yes, you do go out and touch grass, even if it's mowing your own grass. There are many ways to build community, and I'm not at all denigrating the power of technology to connect people to each other in meaningful ways, especially for all the people watching this service on Zoom or watching it on YouTube in the future. Those are all real connections. But this loneliness we feel is a malaise, it's a hopelessness, a thirst for community and identity that can find an expression in a loving community or a destructive expression through hate and fear. And maybe a direct result of this sense of alienation, of distance, of hopelessness, we've dealt with in the last year an epidemic of anti-Semitism. There was a recent survey by the Anti-Defamation League that surprisingly found more prevalent anti-Semitic attitudes among younger Americans than among older Americans. Having an online Jewish presence means facing regular comments that refer to you as the synagogue of Satan, as pedophiles, as baby killers. In-person Jewish space means dealing with potential threats, possible vandalism, even physical attacks, always fear, and needs for ever-increasing security. We started a couple years ago by locking the door after a certain time. And then we hired security. And then we installed bulletproof coating on glass. Then we improved the exterior light. It's always an arms race, an increase, but for some, they never feel safe enough. This is the new reality. Sometimes this anti-Semitism is petty yet painful. You may have heard that in Toronto, in a senior housing development, 20 mezuzahs were stolen from doors. And then a week later, another 10 were taken. Some of this anti-Semitism is deadly. Last month, at a Hanukkah party on Bondi Beach in Australia, 15 Australian Jews were murdered by 2 ISIS-inspired shooters. Another 39 were injured, from children to seniors. And it could have been even worse. The attackers threw 4 homemade bombs into the crowd that didn't detonate. And a brave bystander, Ahmed al-Ahmed, a Syrian Australian, intervened to stop one of the shooters and himself was wounded. Has the Israel-Gaza conflict, or what Israeli settlers are doing to the West Bank Palestinians, has that made things worse for diaspora Jews? No question. Are things as bad for Sudanese Americans, given what's happening in Darfur? Not at all. And we know why. In New York City in 2025, there were 330 reported anti-Semitic incidents. It was actually slightly lower than the year before, which was 334, but basically the same. And yet, that 330 represented 57% of the total hate crimes reported in New York City. New York City Jews are only 10% of the population. That 330 incidents was 10 times the number of Islamophobic incidents or gender-focused incidents. Both left-wing and right-wing manifestations of anti-Semitism have afflicted us, from picketing synagogues and excluding Zios from cultural and political spaces, to explicit Holocaust denial and conspiracies of sinister Jewish governmental and economic influence, even Christian nationalism that says to be a true American you need to be Christian. It's gotten so bad that even many prominent Jewish conservatives admit they have a problem. The toothpaste of anti-Semitism is out of the tube. And so now we have to move forward with this new reality as it is today. We are dealing with an epidemic of artificial intelligence. Can you believe what you see and what you read? AI summaries of news and information often can be correct and helpful, but sometimes they are glaringly wrong if you actually know something about what they're covering. Now, I used to laugh at the AI images with 8 fingers and 3 arms, but they're getting more and more believable. And when they're paired with a text that we want to see, like a story about Paul McCartney visiting Phil Collins in the hospital, or Rachel Maddow announcing that Walmart is leaving the United States because of Trump's tariffs. Or I saw just today, a particular sports figure has announced a shelter for cute puppies, but it's posted with 17 different sports figures in 17 different geographic areas, so people in that area will post the one about the person they know because they want it to be true. But wanting it to be true is dangerous. We want it to be true so badly that we don't investigate whether it actually is true. We're already having enough problems with truths based on words and statistics and revisionist ideological history. Now we also have to grapple with AI-created stories and pictures and videos that will make things even worse. There are absolutely uses for which AI is helpful, undoubtedly. I use hands-free highway driving in my car all the time. It's safer than me alone because it has radar and doesn't get distracted. But it still weirds me out when the steering wheel turns by itself. AI is useful for creating slogans, editing your own writing. We write half of our social media posts now, generating a general copy, then having AI refine it, then editing it back, and it's almost like a collaborative partner to create. It can be a companion, but it may become a crutch. Students become so reliant on it that they don't trust themselves. They'd rather use the AI answer because they trust that more than their own ability to write or to think. Will AI become as essential tomorrow as a computer was for the last 30 years? Or will AI become a Frankenstein's monster run amok? Alas, I suspect it will be both. And last, we are grappling with an epidemic of Jewish fragmentation. Differences between Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews, between Zionism and anti-Zionism, or anti-some Zionisms but not all Zionisms, a generational split, and Jewish arguments as its own sake or with boundaries, where some Jews are allowed and some Jews are beyond the pale. Now, these problems unfortunately overwhelm unquestionable successes that Israel experienced against what Iran called the Ring of Fire, because they had proxy armies in Yemen and in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iran itself with all those ballistic missiles. They had circled Israel and were going to destroy it someday. And in 2025, we had the conflict with Iran. In 12 days, it was over. They have a fraction of the ballistic missiles they had. Their nuclear program is definitely set back. The regime itself is tottering under the pressure of this defeat. In Lebanon, Hezbollah has been neutered. A new government has been installed and is confronting Hezbollah for the first time in a generation. There's a new Syrian regime getting its feet under it. So there's been tremendous progress. And then there's Gaza. There was ultimately a ceasefire in Gaza, or you can call it a ceasefire with quotes if you want, that was established in October. It included releasing a surprising number of surviving Israeli hostages after hundreds of days in captivity. Overall, since October 7th of 2023, 168 living hostages made their way back to Israel by releases or were rescued by IDF forces. Originally, there were 250 taken captive, but 85 of them were killed by friendly fire or died in captivity at the hands of their captors. At the same time, of course, in that same time period, since October 7th of 2023, estimates are that maybe somewhere as many as 60,000 Gazans have died in that period. But there's no official breakdown in those numbers between Hamas fighters and the civilians they're hiding behind. And so now we enter 2026 with a stalemate. Israel still controlling over half of the Gaza Strip, with billions of dollars worth of cleanup and reconstruction awaiting, and Hamas refusing to disarm or accept that any other authority could be in charge. Do we celebrate achievements? Do we recognize sacrifices? Do we think about progress, or do we grapple with the fact of a stalemate? The stresses of this war, the stresses of global hostility and internal debates within Israel, these diaspora questions of what is our Jewish identity vis-a-vis Israel or without a relationship to Israel? What is its role in our relation to the rest of the world that we live among? After all, we don't see the world as incurably anti-Semitic and anti-Jew. Many of us live in that world. Some of us have married that world. We are part of that world. We speak its language. We live its culture. And so we have a different reaction to those protesters on the street or legal cases that work its way through the courts. Are we a nation, an ethnicity? Are we focused on ethical behavior of us as Jews and of a Jewish state, or is it whatever is needed for survival for us? Is it about us as Jews, or is it about all of us as humans? With public criticism of Israel at an all-time high on both the political left and now the MAGA right, that rhetoric of globalize the Intifada has affected almost all Jews, not just Israeli academics. It's not just an academic exercise anymore. These outside pressures on the Jewish people, on individuals and on communities, has produced divisions, especially if you sympathize with some of those criticisms. How far can Jews disagree among themselves? What are the red lines? Are we one people, or are we a broken family? So we come into 2026 profoundly shaken and challenged, divided and hostile. Last January, I predicted a difficult year, particularly difficult for the immigrants, particularly difficult for the transgender and for those who care about them. It proved to be even worse than I expected. For 2026, I do not predict great improvements. Now remember, there are elections scheduled for Israel in October at the latest, and in the US in November. And elections tend not to bring people together. It will be even more divisive. And we will not know where the low points on tribalism and loneliness and AI and anti-Semitism and Jewish fragmentation, where those low points are until things start to improve. And even then, any improvement will be slow and tentative and fragile. There is a non-zero chance that the Iranian regime falls, even though, like Mark Twain responding to a premature obituary, past reports of their demise have been greatly exaggerated. There is a non-zero chance that Bibi Netanyahu's replacement will be elected and will chart a new, but not a radically new course, both internally in Israeli politics and externally dealing with the Palestinians and others. There is a non-zero chance that the excess extremes we've seen in our streets and on our screens and in public dialogue in 2025, that those will be dialed back and restrained in 2026. There's a non-zero chance. But we also have to brace ourselves for the opposite of all those possibilities. This week's Torah portion is the first portion in the book of Exodus. The Hebrews have been fruitful and multiplied, and then there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And everything changed. Slavery, suffering, even murder of children commenced. Even after Moses meets God and is promised deliverance, things continue to get worse before they get better. Tonight, I can offer you hope, but I also encourage you, in an old phrase, to gird your loins. We may not be in the wilderness for 40 years, but there are no guarantees and no shortcuts to our own promised lands. I'm sorry to be a downer, but all I promise you is honesty. When I read events, I am concerned. When I think that it's still not January 20th, the first year isn't over. And these conflicts, these stresses, the arsonist who should be a fireman, we are still dealing with it and will for the next 3 years, most likely. And so this is our challenge, to try to find harmony and common ground. There are inklings of it here and there, legislation that passes despite recalcitrant opposition, bridging attempts, maybe. We have to look for the sparks of light. If we can assemble those sparks into something that resembles a candle or a lantern, maybe we have more hope. But in the long run, we have to be ready for what might be worse before it gets better. I do want to thank our Onik host this evening, even if I've turned your stomach and you don't want anything to eat afterwards. Hopefully you'll stay and have a chance to schmooze. I want to thank those who joined us online as well. Our closing song, which is on the last page of your service, is an affirmation of what people can do to make the world better. It is Hevenu Shalom Aleichem. We bring you peace, and I hope that in the year to come, we will be able to look back at 2025 as the low point, and 2026 as the turn, as things get a little bit better and a little bit better.